Hello, everyone. Thank you for being here and being part of our presentation. Today, we are going to be discussing the topic of dealing with conflict in the workplace, presented by myself, Elizabeth Kempfert, Gabrielle Reynolds, and Amber Markin. So first, we're going to do introductions of the speakers, starting with myself. Like I said, my name is Elizabeth Kempfert. I'm a licensed clinical social worker and qualified supervisor in the state of Florida. I have my master's degree in social work from St. Leo University, completed in 2017. Before that, I got my bachelor's degree in psychology from the University of Central Florida. And prior to that, my associate's degree with a concentration in psychology from Florida State University. I'm currently working on my Doctor of Social Work through the University of Kentucky. I am a full-time employee at the Department of Veterans Affairs since 2017. I also did my internship there prior to that. My role currently is a suicide prevention care manager for the VA, but I've also served in other capacities. I was an emergency department social worker, a post 9/11 social worker, and I floated on medical wards and helped in primary care and outpatient mental health. So that's a little bit about me. And then we'll move on. We'll have everyone introduce themselves and then we'll get started.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Gabrielle Reynolds. I am a licensed independent social worker with a supervision designation in Ohio. I received my associate's degree in mental health in 2011, my bachelor's degree in social work in 2014, and my master's degree in social work in 2017. I'm currently a doctoral candidate at the University of Kentucky with expected graduation in May of 2025. I've been in the medical social work field since 2018. I currently work at the Department of Veteran Affairs, where I'm in charge of discharge planning from the acute medical floors. And I'm also the respite coordinator for the Dayton, Springfield, Middletown, and Richmond, Indiana VA. I often advocate for veterans and their families. I'm a team player who frequently helps my coworkers when staffing is low and extra help is needed at the VA. I'm currently residing at the Wright Pat Medical Center, is where I'm stationed at. So I frequently go to the VA to help out over there when staffing is low. I pride myself in being empathetic, approachable, respectful, responsible, and an active listener. And I'm also an aspiring leader within the social work field.
Hello, everyone. My name is Amber Markin. I currently have a master's of social work degree obtained in 2022 from the University of Kentucky, and I'm working on pursuing my doctoral and doctorate in social work from the University of Kentucky as well. My anticipated graduation is May of 2025. I've worked extensively with children who exhibited severe behavioral disturbances. For the primary parts of my career, I've been very blessed in the sense that I've been able to do different leadership roles, clinical roles, and different social work fields to kind of see where my niche is. But I'm currently working as a foster parent trainer for a nonprofit company, and I love it very much. So I've, like I said, held multiple positions over the course of my 6-year career, but I currently am working as a foster parent trainer, and I am hoping to maintain a leadership role in my region very soon within that position.
All right, so to start off, we are going to do an overview of the topic. So, conflict, it's common within all relationships. We see it in workplace relationships, which is really what we'll be focusing on today. But you see it in romantic relationships, friendships. It's something that cannot be avoided. In the workplace environments often have individuals with different viewpoints. Now, this can be a large strength, drawing upon the views of different people within the workplace when you're trying to solve a problem, but it can also lead to butting heads or some form of conflict when those viewpoints differ. Um, Avoidance and prevention are usually the first course of action with conflict, but that's not always possible. So there has to be strategies put in place and plan to address conflict when it arises in the workplace. So, what is conflict? Ronquillo defined conflict as the disagreement or difference of opinions between or among individuals that can be potentially harmful to any organization. Now, that is true. Conflict can certainly be harmful, especially if it's ongoing conflict, if it's not easily resolved, if it's maybe causing blockages within the workflow, it can be harmful. We're going to talk a little bit soon, though. Sometimes conflict can be a very beneficial thing in the long run. In the workplace setting specifically, Ronquillo described conflict as often involving personal agendas, insights, or goals versus the agenda, insight, or goals of the group or team. One could argue that might oversimplify what conflict is, but if we view it through this lens, a lot of times conflict is the person putting their personal priorities above the priorities of the organization or the full team, which can certainly cause conflict because we want everyone to be working towards those overarching goals in the workplace setting. So let's talk about some examples of conflict, specifically from a social work standpoint. The first one that comes to mind would be disagreements on a client treatment plan. So let's say you are a psychotherapist, you're the social worker treating an individual for weekly therapy. You're working with a psychiatrist that meets with the patient once a month for medication management. And when you go to discuss your concerns about the client, you voice to the psychiatrist that you think this individual might have ADHD. The psychiatrist disagrees with you on that diagnosis, and and basically decides he wants to treat a different type of diagnosis that he sees. He doesn't feel comfortable also prescribing the typical medications prescribed for ADHD, such as Adderall, et cetera. And so there's a disagreement here because moving forward for the treatment plan, you guys have hit a barrier. You're not agreeing on what to do. So that's an example of a treatment plan conflict. And we're going to circle back to this in a second, but that's one example. Another example of social work conflict could be disagreements on personal opinions. So let's say you walk into the break room, you're a social worker at a facility, and you overhear a few of your peers discussing their political opinions. They're talking about who they want to vote for the next election, and you don't agree with them. You don't like the person that they're talking about. You're not going to vote for that person. And so maybe you start to view them in a different way because of the different political opinions. And maybe this conflict comes up where when you're dealing with them in the workplace, maybe you're treating them differently or they're treating you differently because you found out that you have different political opinions. So that's an example of personal opinions impacting in the workplace. A third example is disagreements on practices and policies. So for this case example, you're a social worker in an emergency room, and the policy for veterans, let's say a veteran hospital or clients or veterans that are admitted is that if they're admitted involuntarily and they come in with their dog or service animal and they don't have someone or some place for the dog to go, the policy would be for the dog to go to a local shelter. Now, even though that's the policy, there's disagreements among staff about whether that's really ethical. With someone going into currently having a mental health crisis, the last thing you want to do is take away something that's a major support to them or someone they love, something they love. Being the person that has to call the shelter as the social worker, you're not really agreeing with the policy. Your staff isn't really agreeing with the policy, but the leaders are saying that that's what you have to do. So that's an example for that one. And then the last social work conflict example I'm going to talk about is disagreements on team priorities. So for this one, say you work on a suicide prevention team, and the two major goals are community outreach and clinical interventions. But your team is divided on which is more important. And so when workload gets high, one part of the team thinks one part should be prioritized and the other thinks the other should be. And so this causes conflict as far as how to organize your day and what really is going to help the overall cause. So those are some descriptions of examples, and we are going to circle back to those, but I just wanted to kind of explain some of the ways you might see conflict with social work. So we've talked about how conflict can be negative. None of those situations I just described really sound positive. I'm sure they're not things that you really want to deal with at work. Not fun. But can conflict be an opportunity? The overwhelming answer to that is yes, 100% yes. Conflict has the opportunity to really promote teamwork. It can have a lot of positive impacts. We're going to talk about those specific impacts next. So if conflict is managed properly, one thing that can come from that is innovative ideas. So we talked about that dog in the ER example. If we manage that conflict properly, where we don't agree with the policy that the dog goes to the shelter, one way one thing that can come from it is an innovative idea. So say a nurse suggests, hey, why don't we reach out to one of the local dog fostering organizations to see if they'd help in these emergency situations. And due to that innovative idea that stemmed from this conflict, the social worker yourself reaches out and ends up being able to create a relationship with the local organization. So now when veterans get admitted, and if they don't have a place for the dog to go, there's an organization locally that will help watch the dog while they're in the hospital with their consent for free. So that solves that issue where you are still not leaving, the staff to care for the dog, but the client is not also losing their dog. So an innovative idea just stems from people not being happy with the policy or not agreeing on that. New ways of handling issues can come about if you manage this properly. So the example where the psychiatrist and the social worker didn't agree on the treatment plan. They hit a crossroads and they weren't really sure where to go from that. The psychiatrist suggests, hey, why don't we include our team for a team discussion of our clients? Why don't we get some other viewpoints here on what's going on and see if we can settle this with a third party? So in that case scenario, they developed a team meeting where problem cases were discussed once a week. And they were able to differentiate what the diagnosis was and able to move forward with a plan that everyone agreed on. And so this conflict resulted in a new way of handling issues. Team development. We can really have a better, stronger team after workplace conflict. The example of suicide prevention and what's more important, outreach versus individual therapy or client engagement, really can stem important conversation about the cause, looking at research and coming together as a team to try and make both a priority if possible. So discussing those can really foster a more team mentality if you choose to look for a solution instead of focusing on the differences in agreement or disagreements. And last, one thing that can come from if you're managing conflict properly is empathetic and critical thinking skills. So in the example about politics, where two people disagreed on the political candidates and who they were going to vote for, if you choose to talk empathetically and with critical thinking skills with your coworker, you can gain empathy. Maybe there's a specific reason you hadn't thought of that they're voting for that individual, or maybe they view an issue differently than you. If you're able to do that, there can be growth in empathy and critical thinking skills if you're able to view it that way. And sometimes that's not even a discussion how it works. Sometimes it's just choosing to try and see other ways of viewing issues without even having that conversation so that it doesn't impact the work environment. All in all, these are all examples of managing conflict properly, turning bad examples into positive ones. And if you're able to do that, ultimately, you can become a much better leader.
Sorry, didn't unmute myself. Next, we're going to talk about key concepts, ideals, and strategies to conflict resolution. Next slide, please. Human interaction is fundamentally based on conflict. All human dynamics have the potential for conflict to occur. Conflict is essentially an expression of differences, as we've heard, in factors such as opinions, cultural dynamics, and environments. The presence of differences across human interactions is the basis for conflict to occur. Thus, conflict is normal. Leaders must recognize that conflict is a result of diversity and an essential part of the leadership role. Leaders must take the initiative to understand conflict, to understand how to appropriately apply conflict resolution strategies. Next slide, please. Key conflict resolution aspects. Conflict resolution is defined as the ability to find amicable solutions to a conflict between multiple parties. Conflict will occur is the main ideal here. Building approaches to addressing conflict is essential to resolving conflict and also to effective leadership. Next slide, please. Starting the resolution to conflict resolution. Leaders should identify the causes of the conflict. Is it based on a misunderstanding, cultural differences, a difference in opinion, someone feeling that they weren't treated fairly, or other factors? Acknowledge the problem by facing it head on. Don't ignore the problem and don't let it grow into a bigger concern or problem than it already is. Prioritize the areas of conflict. Discuss what is most important. Develop a plan. Set rules and set clear boundaries. Make sure all parties involved are communicating respectfully and that all parties feel heard. Next slide, please. Conflict resolution. Research indicates that there is not any one-size-fits-all conflict resolution strategy. The leader must be able to manage the expectations of the parties involved and create an environment where different parties can work together harmoniously. Remedies should be culturally appropriate and adequately address the situation so that it does not continue. Next slide, please. Different individuals may select different conflict management styles depending on their personality, beliefs, values, and other factors. The leader may guide and counsel the conflicting parties and help them navigate through the process of conflict resolution. Some leaders prefer to have face-to-face interactions between the parties to help them see eye to eye. The success of the leader's intervention in conflict resolution is determined by the perception of the leader's impartiality and objectivity in the resolution. If the leader is perceived as siding with one of the parties in the conflict, the leader could lose credibility. The leader needs to remain neutral in these situations. Next slide, please. Leaders need to be cognizant of their responses to conflict. They must first recognize that conflict, again, is normal and will occur. The goal is not to completely end all conflict, which is virtually impossible, but instead it is to recognize that conflict occurring and utilize conflict resolution skills to move the interaction towards a positive outcome for all parties involved. This shift will help to decrease the occurrences of conflicts, but may not eliminate them completely. Leaders experiencing the potential for conflict and conflict itself can experience a variety of emotional responses. Management of conflict in organizations should include the assessment of the leader's emotional comfort with conflict situations. A leader who is aware of their responses to conflict situations sets the tone for how the organization approaches conflict situations. A leader who is aware of their responses to conflict situations, a leader's personal disposition towards conflicts is one of the most critical influences related to addressing conflicts early and effectively in the workplace setting. A leader with a negative disposition towards conflict will approach conflict differently than a leader who is equipped with conflict resolution tools. A leader with a negative disposition may not have a favorable outcome to the conflict, as another leader with a positive disposition will. Next slide, please. Key considerations for leaders. Before confronting conflict situations or guiding others in doing so, leaders should have resolved the following personal issues regarding their own responses to conflict: awareness of personal tension and the physiological responses when conflict occurs. The physiological responses to conflict, such as increased heart rate, sweaty palms, and rapid breathing. The immediate reactions and behaviors that occur in response to the conflict occurring. Personal language responses to the conflict. Personal thoughts, patterns, and expressions in response to conflict. And the leader's access to personal tools and skills that can be used for responses to conflict. Effective leaders should develop intuitive skills in facilitating the work and the interaction of others to anticipate the normal elements of conflict, the potential for the conflict to occur, and the early management of conflict processes. Leaders guide others in the development of appropriate responses to conflict situations. Each leader must reflect a level of comfort when dealing with conflict, which should be embedded in the leader's behavioral patterns. Next slide.
Okay, so now we're going to go through the strengths, limitations, and barriers that are present within dealing with conflict in the workplace. So, as a leader, balancing these strengths and limitations is crucial for effective conflict management in the workplace. So, for our strengths, we're looking at improved communication, which says that addressing conflict often leads to better communication among team members, and it fosters a clearer understanding of issues. Another strength is enhanced relationships. Successfully resolving conflicts can strengthen relationships, promoting a sense of teamwork and collaboration. Increase productivity. Resolving conflicts can reduce distractions and allow team members to focus on their work, ultimately enhancing their productivity. Personal growth. Engaging in conflict resolution can improve individuals' problem solving and negotiation skills, which also contributes to personal and professional development. And the final strength that we want to cover is innovation. And this is noting that diverse perspectives brought out during conflicts can lead to creative solutions and innovation as different viewpoints are considered and addressed. So, some limitations or barriers that we're seeing within conflict in the workplace is that conflicts are time consuming. Conflict resolution can be lengthy and it can divert attention from tasks that affect the productivity of team members. There's also an emotional strain that's related to conflict, and navigating conflicts can be emotionally taxing for individuals, leading to stress and possible decreased morale. There's also the potential for escalation. If not handled carefully, conflicts can escalate quickly, which can lead to more significant issues or a toxic work environment where people don't want to be a part of that team anymore. And then ineffective resolution. Sometimes attempts to resolve conflicts may not be successful, and that can lead to lingering resentment or unresolved issues. And then the final limitation or barrier that I want to highlight is power dynamics. And this is showing that conflicts can be complicated by power imbalances, making it very difficult for all voices to be heard and to be considered within the resolution process. So, leaders can take several proactive steps to enhance strengths and mitigate limitations of conflict resolution in the workplace. So, one of the things that leaders can do to enhance strengths is to promote that open communication. So, leaders can work to encourage an open door policy where employees feel safe discussing their concerns. And they can also hold regular check ins that can help address issues before they escalate into bigger problems. Another strength that leaders can enhance is fostering a collaborative culture. They can create an environment where teamwork is valued and create team building activities that can strengthen relationships and promote collaboration among team members and among leadership. Leaders can provide conflict resolution training, so they can offer training on sessions on conflict resolution and communicate skills to equip employees with the tools that they need to handle disputes effectively, because sometimes we come in as employees and we don't always know how to do adequate conflict resolution. So learning how to do that can be very beneficial. Leaders can encourage diverse perspectives so they can actively seek input from their team members with different viewpoints. And this diversity can lead to innovative solutions in a more comprehensive problem-solving environment. And then finally, they can model effective conflict resolution. So they can demonstrate healthy conflict resolution behaviors as a leader by showing how to approach disagreements constructively and emphasize the importance of finding common ground. Excuse me. So leaders can mitigate limitations and barriers within conflicts in the workplace by first setting clear expectations. So leaders should clearly outline the process for addressing conflicts to prevent confusion and ensure that everyone knows how to proceed forward. Leaders should be mindful of time management. They should prioritize conflict resolution to prevent it from consuming too much time. By scheduling dedicated times for conflict discussions to keep other work on track. That's a great way that they can do that. Leaders should also provide emotional support. And within that, they can recognize that conflicts can be very stressful for everyone involved and offer support services such as counseling services or stress management workshops, or maybe even some PTO time to just do some self-care. And that can all help employees to cope a little bit better. They can facilitate mediation in cases of escalated conflicts. Leaders should consider involving a neutral third party to mediate discussions, ensuring that all voices are heard and reducing power imbalances. And then they can follow up on resolutions. So even after a conflict has occurred and it's been resolved, they need to check in with the involved parties to ensure that that resolution is effective and that there aren't any lingering issues that need to be addressed or any feelings that maybe come up later on since that's happened. So by implementing these strategies, leaders can create a more harmonious and productive workplace while effectively managing conflicts as they arise. In social work leadership, dealing with conflict presents unique strengths and limitations and barriers. So here's a little bit of a breakdown and how this is specific to social work leadership in terms of dealing with conflict in the workplace. So the strengths that we see social work leaders really rely on are emphasis on collaboration. So as social workers, we inherently value collaboration, which can facilitate cooperative conflict resolution and strengthen team dynamics. Social work leaders are also really good about understanding diverse perspectives. So as social work leaders, we're often skilled in empathy and cultural competence, which enables us to appreciate diverse viewpoints and mediate conflicts effectively. Social work leaders also focus on problem solving, and that often is prioritized through solutions that are beneficial to all parties involved. And those social work leaders are really good typically about fostering a constructive approach to conflict resolution. Another strength is commitment to ethical standards. So as a social worker, a strong ethical framework guides our leadership, and we work to resolve conflicts in a manner that aligns with those core values and promote fairness and integrity. And finally, some strength in social work leadership when dealing with conflict is team development. So we know that conflicts can serve as a catalyst for team growth, and leaders can leverage these conflicts to enhance team cohesion and improve communication skills. And oftentimes social workers do that really well by highlighting more strengths-based approaches and also doing like partnerships in strengths and weaknesses and tag teaming people up for that collaboration. Excuse me. So some limitations and some barriers that we see in social work leadership when they are dealing with conflicts in the workplace. The first is some emotional challenges. Social work and social work field is really hard and can be very emotional. So it can complicate conflict resolution. And as leaders, team members may be personally affected by issues at hand, and that can be really hard to navigate sometimes. As social workers too, we also deal with high stress environments. And these things can exacerbate conflicts and hinder effective communication and resolutions because it's just a really tense environment all the time. Another limitation or barrier to social work leadership within conflicts is resource constraints. Social workers have very limited resources, and that can make conflict resolution very difficult at times. As leaders in the social work field, we may lack the time or support needed to address those conflicts thoroughly and adequately to make sure that they are effectively resolved. We also see that there's some power imbalances at play. So conflicts may arise from power dynamics, particularly in hierarchical structures, making it challenging for all voices to be heard equally at times. We also see varying conflict styles. That's just because social workers come from such a big, diverse background that have many different experiences, and sometimes this can lead to different approaches to conflict and how to reduce conflict in general. And so leaderships sometimes struggle with the capacity for resolution as individuals become less engaged when it's not an approach that they necessarily agree with or that they're accustomed to. And finally, burnout. So in social work, burnout is a huge thing that we encounter all the time, and it's something that social work leaders struggle with. And that's because high levels of stress and burnout among social work staff can lead to increased conflict, which could reduce the capacity for resolutions. So as they become less engaged, as they become less interactive with their environment, then they're less likely to want to even work on those conflicts. They kind of just toss the towel in and they're fed up. And as a leader, that can be very hard. So by recognizing these strengths and limitations, social work leaders can develop strategies to navigate conflicts effectively, enhancing team functioning and overall service delivery. So when we're looking at techniques for social work leaders to enhance strengths, so things that we can do to do better in the strengths aspect, social workers can enhance strengths by promoting collaborative culture, which is included with facilitating team building and encouraging shared decision making. Essentially, what we're looking at here is involving our team members in discussions, enhancing their investments in their outcomes, and making sure that we're building a time for these things to happen and that activities can foster trust and collaboration amongst team members. Secondly, they can leverage diverse perspectives, and this can be done through diversity training and encouraging open dialogue. Once again, just really creating those safe spaces for discussion where any perspective can be heard and listened to. But then on the flip side of that, also providing training on cultural competence and inclusion so that other team members are open to those diverse perspectives and are not closed off to those things. Thirdly, we can focus on problem solving. And by doing this, we develop conflict resolution protocols and we train on conflict management. So establishing a clear process for addressing conflicts and emphasizing constructive problem solving techniques, while also offering workshops that enhance skills in negotiation and mediation, and never forgetting that we need to empower our team members to approach conflicts effectively. So when team members are wanting to deal with conflict directly, not discouraging that, really enhancing that and making sure that we're listening to them and supporting them in that. Another thing that we can do is strengthen ethical standards. So we can reinforce those core values that we hold, and some of those values include empathy, unconditional positive regard, listening, the active listening, those diverse perspectives, all of those things, reinforcing those core values. And then we can also model ethical behavior. And I think that's a key one for social work leaders because we should exemplify ethical decision making in conflict situations and reinforce the importance of integrity. When our team members see that we're handling conflict in a good way, in an effective way, then they're going to want to do the same thing. So we have to model that ethical behavior. And finally, utilize conflict for team development so we can debrief after conflicts and recognize growth opportunities. So after conflict's resolved, hold discussions to reflect on what was learned and how the team can improve. We don't have to use specific examples, but we can be very direct in saying, hey, this was a problem. This is how it was handled. How can we do it better, or what was good with what we did? And then highlight those instances where conflicts led to positive outcomes so that you reinforce the idea that challenges can lead to growth. So, techniques for social work leaders to address the limitations and barriers that we discussed. The first is providing support, emotional well being, which is providing access to mental health resources and encouraging self care. So, like we mentioned before, do those workshops, provide those trainings, allow people time to recharge and manage stress effectively. Those are all key things that we can be doing to help with those limitations and barriers. Social work leaders can also manage high stress environments better by implementing stress reduction programs and fostering that open communication. So instead of just providing the trainings alone, set initiatives that help alleviate workplace stress, such as flexible scheduling, now in the time of world telehealth, being able to allow them to work from home, teaching them some mindfulness training and some things that they can do to calm down when they're stressed out. And then we can also work on encouraging team members to voice their concerns about workload and stress, because as social workers, that's a huge part of what we do. It's a very high stress job. And when we encourage our team members to voice their concerns about that, then we're letting them feel heard and understood. Social work leaders can address resource constraints so they can advocate for resources and they can prioritize conflict resolution. So they should actively seek additional resources constantly, and they should support their team and get additional support from management to facilitate effective conflict resolution, and allocate dedicated time and resources for resolving conflicts. So even though those resources may be far and few between, making sure that we're being very intentional about dedicating time and resources to ensuring that conflicts are being resolved properly. Excuse me. Mitigate power imbalances. So social work leaders can do this by creating inclusive practices and encouraging peer mediation. So making sure that all employees have an equal opportunity to voice their opinions within a conflict. And then also training staff in peer mediation techniques, empowering them to help resolve conflicts among their colleagues. So we talked a little bit earlier about bringing in that third party when we use our team members to do that. And we're doing it from a place of trust and collaboration and wanting to empower and build up our other colleagues, then that can be a good way to allocate more additional resources that maybe we didn't have before. And then finally, we can recognize and combat burnout, and this can be done through monitoring workloads and promoting a supportive environment. So regularly assessing team workloads and preventing overwhelm and burnout, which is really hard in this field, but it's something that leaders have to do. And they can create a workplace culture that values support and understanding. So encouraging team members to seek help when it is needed. By actively enhancing strengths and addressing limitations, social work leaders can create a more resilient, collaborative, and effective workplace environment that navigates conflicts constructively. So now we're going to move into the implications for social work. And we're going to start by looking at the implications for leadership in social work. So conflict in the workplace can have significant implications for social work practice. So social workers often operate in environments where collaboration, communication, and teamwork are crucial, which we've reviewed quite a bit. But understanding and addressing workplace conflict effectively is important to ensure that we are maintaining a positive work culture and ensuring client welfare and also fostering professional development. So some key implications that for dealing with conflicts in the workplace for social work practices includes roles in shaping organizational culture, maintaining service delivery and client care, managing power dynamics and equity. And all of these things are really important for social workers because managing conflict in the workplace involves balancing personal, emotional well-being with professional obligations to clients and colleagues. So by developing strong conflict resolution skills, fostering an inclusive environment, In advocating for systemic improvements, social workers can mitigate the negative effects of workplace conflict while enhancing their own practice and the outcomes for their clients. The implications for social work practice are really key to address as well. So, for social work leaders, addressing workplace conflict carries unique responsibilities that go beyond managing the immediate issues. Their role is to set the tone for conflict resolution, maintain a positive work culture, and ensure that conflicts do not compromise the quality of service to clients or to the team's well being. So, as we look, oh, I'm sorry. I don't know what happened. Okay. I'm not sure what happened with that. But for social work leaders, handling conflict in the workplace requires a multifaceted approach that involves not just resolving individual disputes, but also fostering a positive, equitable, and supportive work culture. So, effective leadership and conflict resolution can improve staff well being, reduce turnover, and enhance service delivery, ultimately benefiting both employees and clients. So, social work leaders must also advocate for systemic change when conflicts arise from organizational issues, and that ensures that social work practice remains aligned with the core values of the profession.
I don't think the volume's on.
I'm sorry.
We can see it, but for some reason, I think the sound isn't there.
Yeah.
Oh, that's wonderful. Let me see. Okay. We might just skip that then. I'm not sure how to get this scale to work. I'm sorry, guys.
No worries.
All right, and to wrap up the presentation, keep in mind that conflict is a normal occurrence due to differences between people. Leaders should learn effective conflict resolution skills. Effective conflict resolution improves the workplace environment, productivity, and team collaboration. Leaders can focus on reducing barriers to conflict resolution by addressing their own emotional responses to conflict, increasing the employee's strengths, and creating an inclusive work environment where everyone is heard and supported. Social work leaders should model effective conflict resolution by displaying active listening, empathy, and creating fair solutions to conflict.
All right, so this is the portion where we can open it up to questions from anyone. If anyone has any questions, we appreciate it. But we are here to answer them for you for if you have any.
Hello, how y'all doing?
Good, how are you?
Good evening.
Okay, well, my question is this: what is the best approach when there are multiple employees involved in the conflict?
I can take that one. So you mean like there's more than just two employees involved in a conflict? There's like a group of employees in a conflict?
Yes, ma'am.
So we probably will go back to our starting a resolution. So we definitely want to identify the cause of the conflict, identify the parties involved in the conflict, acknowledge the problem, prioritize the areas of conflict, discuss what is most important for the conflict, for the resolution. We want to develop a plan, set rules, and set clear boundaries. Make sure all parties involved are communicating respectfully. No one is, hitting each other with low blows, name calling, getting out of line, anything like that. We definitely want to make sure all parties are feeling heard and respected within the workplace. between all parties. If it's a group against another group, we definitely want to mediate between the two groups and be the go-between between those two. Again, not taking sides, remaining neutral, and making sure that we are being that voice for both sides to effectively resolve that conflict between the two parties or two groups.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Any other questions?
I have a question. What is the difference between dealing with conflict in the workplace as a social work leader versus other professional environments?
I can take that one. I think the difference really is for social workers, our emphasis, like we said, on those core values, which inspires us as leaders to look at conflict differently. So earlier, Elizabeth mentioned that conflict can be seen as an opportunity. And I feel like in other professions, that is not how leaders view conflict whatsoever. So we see it as an opportunity to help foster better relationships amongst team members. We see it as an opportunity to impact our clients positively because ultimately, when our team members are going to be working together, they're going to get better services out to our clients. And then we also see it as a way to promote our trauma-informed practices. And so just making sure that we address conflicts with the understanding of trauma and people's history. A lot of leaders in other professional organizations wouldn't have that type of advantage, whereas we see conflict is not always what it is at face value. There's sometimes some deeper rooted issues there. And so as social work leaders, we're able to address those a little bit more sensitively and more effectively to prevent them from reoccurring, I think, again, long term, and not having it kind of rear its ugly head multiple times like you see in a lot of other professions. So I think it's really just those ethical considerations and the way that social work leaders view conflict as a whole.
I think one thing too that's interesting about that question and just that concept is that I think what both of you had discussed at points during the presentation was how burnout is very prominent in social work, and it's a very challenging profession, and we had, we go through a lot of different challenging, no matter what setting of social work you're working in, you're going to have challenges. So I think that I think there's a level of empathy too when there's frustration or conflict, and maybe a level of understanding, like you said, that isn't there in other professions, and maybe it's somewhat because of the challenges that the profession experiences. So it's just good to have that high level of empathy.
Do we have any other questions? Okay. Well, to wrap up, we do have a little questionnaire for you guys to kind of fill out and let us know how you think we did and just give us some insight back. And I'm going to ask Elizabeth if she could drop that in the chat. So if you would please just take maybe 3 to 5 minutes to answer those questions on that form for us before you hop off. That way we know that it gets done and we can get that feedback and learn how to improve in the future on our webinars.
Okay, and I just added it and changed it so that everyone can access. So it should be in there, and we really appreciate your time this evening.
And we'll stay on here. If you guys think of any more questions, you just let us know. But once you get that form kind of filled out and you're done, feel free to hop off. And once again, we thank you guys so much for joining us and listening to our webinar.
Yes, thank you so much, everyone, for joining us tonight. Kenneth, are you able to just type in the number beside the question that you're picking? Oh, maybe I got kicked off.
It might be because the document's shared. It might be hard. I'm not sure if they can edit. If anything, they can just send us their 5 numbers after the fact, maybe. And then we'll look into them after the presentation if that works for you guys.
All right.
Yeah, that's fine.
All right.